Okay, this is the B section in the outline at the top of page 14. The inevitable, complete, and irrevocable character of Babylon's fall. Now, I think I shared with you that many people see this as apostate religion, Babylon. I think that owes more to the polemics of the Reformation than it does to biblical studies. Because I think as we read this together and you begin to understand the things that are said about Babylon, you'll see that the idea that I have and Hendrickson has, that it is the allure, it is the worldly luxury, pleasure that lures God's people away from being faithful to Him. And I don't see how, except by really twisting, you can make it apostate religion. Now, some of the polemicists of the Reformation did a pretty good job of doing that, but it was kind of selective and twisted, I think, the clear meaning of the text and showed their innate hatred of Catholicism. So this is, like I say, this is that small B section, and that's the whole chapter. You notice that in the parentheses it says 18. That's chapter 18. After these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven. Now, I want you to notice the pattern of how this develops. He sees an angel, and then the angel does something, and we have it. I have indented it and put it in what I call semi-poetic form, because that's the best way to represent what's going on here. And the earth was illumined by his splendor. He was an angel that was shining with light. Some commentators point out that this is from being in the presence of God. You remember that Moses had to veil his face because of the splendor that he had absorbed from being in the presence of God. And in the Old Testament, Yahweh is always represented as a bright light, not any being. Be a violation of the idea of don't make any graven image of God, any kind of molten image of God for that matter. And so he just appears. You remember we've run into that already in the book of Revelation. When we see the throne room scene in chapters 4, 5, and 6, all you see is someone sitting on the throne. There's just a bright light there. And so this angel comes down. Now, in the past, I have said something that I want to consciously retract. I said that the word heaven in the New Testament never means what we think of when we say heaven. But there are places in the book of Revelation where it does. It means from where God is. And so I try to translate it sky where it's obviously sky, but I also try to translate it heaven where it's obviously from the presence of God. And that's what the word heaven here indicates. He cried out in a loud voice. The book that I use for grammar, vocabulary, and hints about the meaning of the text from almost every source you can think of, says that this word is sometimes used for scream. So I just didn't quite think that angels would scream. Somehow that just didn't feel right with me. So I'm going to say a loud voice, a great voice. I think you could say he boomed it out. When he spoke, everything gets silent, is the idea. It was an overwhelming voice. Fallen, fallen. Now, this is a little difficult to translate, but it is the past tense idea, even though this is before Babylon has, whether you realize it or not. But in Hebrew prophetic language, the prophetic language is already always in the perfect tense. It is, when God speaks it, it's already happened. That's the idea. And so I tried to carry out that idea here. Is Babylon the Great? I should delete that capital I, because following an exclamation point, you don't put a capital after. So I'll do that. She has become the abode of demons. Now, are you familiar with the passages in Isaiah that talk about the destruction of Babylon, the real physical Babylon city? This is not exactly a paraphrase, but it's the same idea because at the time Isaiah was talking about, Babylon did fall, and the ruins were there. And when the Western Europeans began to go into that country in the 17th and 18th centuries, the ruins were still there, and they were still the Arabic people that lived in the area at that time would talk about jinns. That's J-I-N-N, and those were what we call genies. A jinn was a demon, though. It was a demonic presence. So she's become the abode of demons and a prison for all kinds of unclean spirits. And for every kind of unclean and hateful bird. Got a lot of correction to do there. I can't proofread my material when it's fresh. I have to wait and let it cook.
I was wondering, when you were talking about this fall when Babylon fell, are you referring to the fall when Nebuchadnezzar's son was hosting the party, and Cyrus?
Yes. Now that's the one that's in Isaiah.
Okay, but is that the one that you were referring to, that when Babylon fell, or was there another fall?
No, that's okay. Now this is not historical Babylon.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, I know that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Babylon stands for.
Yes, and it stands for that worldly allurement.
Right.
Now, obviously, it is to me anyway. This is Rome, physical Rome, and it fits. But it is more than that. It is Rome that stands for the allurement, and I keep using that word because that's the thing we have to recognize, that these great cities. I don't want to whip the Big Apple, but make applesauce out of it or something. But that is typical. You can find any kind of vice and allurement. It can be either immoral or neutral as far as morality. I'm not saying everything is immoral, but every kind of distraction from serving God. It's difficult to be a Christian in New York City and in any big city. You don't have to go that far. We're living in one that, while it's not as rampant and as acceptable as it is in some, it's there. And then you can just go a couple of 100 miles east from here, and you got one of the great alluring cities in the world, in Houston.
I've got another question. Since this is a type of, and it's referring to that event in Daniel where Nebuchadnezzar's son is kind of glorying over the fact that his God is greater than the God of Israel, and he's using the cups from the sanctuary and stuff like that. If maybe that might be a clue as to what the final might be like. In other
Well,
words,
yes.
God denial aspect.
Yeah, I think so. Ray, you had your...
What's the significance of birds? Why does he use birds?
Because to the Jews, there were a whole lot of hateful and unclean birds. There were very few birds. Pigeons and doves were pretty much the exception. And so in these ancient cities that were destroyed and burned and just left in ruins, the birds made their home, their habitat. And if you went into them, have you ever been where there's a bunch of birds and you go into the middle of them and they fly up? That's the picture. I want you to get a picture. What? HEB parking. They're grackles. Yeah.
We used to swim in the Mississippi River on the backside of an island, and when we walked down the dock to get to the water, there were blackbirds, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but blackbirds are very protective of their environment. Well, they would be in these cattails, and they had their nest in there, and if you walk down that thing, they would dive bomb.
Oh, yeah. Now, all of those things you're talking about is included in this idea. I think
I'm curious about something. When you say fallen, are we talking about a world economic system also after all the destruction that just happened? Because a big city, worldly, if there's no economic functioning in there, it won't be able to come back.
No, here's the thing about this. We are getting over into the section of Revelation where it's the final judgment upon that. Are you with me on that? There won't be anything that succeeds it. See, there are examples of this throughout the Christian dispensation and all, but we're beginning the final destruction of the enemies of God, of Christ, especially Christ. And that's the idea here. One time I was walking, got a ride from town, Conroe, and I just got off and walked through the woods because it was dry and I knew the woods like the back of my hand. And there would be heavy underbrush, but there was a cattle trail or a pig trail that I could walk on. And just as I stepped out of the heavy underbrush into a clearing, I stepped into a covey of sleeping quail. And I'm telling you, before my brain could tell me what it was, my heart already knew. And it bumped at the roof of my mouth, and I sat down because my legs wouldn't hold me. And so I always think about that when the wings roar and flap and all. And I want you to see, there's nothing left there. It's just ruins, and demons live there, and unclean birds. This happened because all the nations have drunk of the wine of her sexual sins. Now, so many translations say the wine of her adultery. This is not the word for adultery. It's porne, which means illicit sex, not just one or two married people having illicit sex, but that's the reason I call her the prostitute, because that's what the word means. Also, the merchants have become rich by selling her luxuries. Now, this is going to be a theme throughout this chapter. Merchants don't make their living by selling to an apostate religion. They make their living by selling luxuries to these urban centers, of which Babylon is a symbol. Then I heard another voice coming from heaven say, now, this, you'll see there's a kind of dialogue here. There's one angel says something, and then a voice coming from heaven. Now, I'm not absolutely sure, but I'm close to it, that this is meant to be the voice from the throne, because in some places it will say a voice came from the throne. Now, this is what the Jews call the Bath Kol, the daughter voice. And when the rabbis used that phrase, they meant it was the voice of God, but you didn't want to talk about God directly because he was too awesome. So they called it the daughter voice. It's the voice as the daughter of God. Probably could be considered the voice of wisdom, of God's wisdom. Come out from her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins or receive any of her plagues. Now, this is God saying, you who belong to me, you who belong to Christ, don't have anything to do with this kind of life, this style of life. Come out, separate yourself. Her sins have piled up as high as the sky. Now, there is a place where the word sky is appropriate to use. And God remembers her crimes. That's a difficult phrase. I wanted to get something else there, but I couldn't think of anything. I may try to. The idea is that this big pile of her sins that reaches all the way to the sky. Now think about that. She's so sinful that her sins piled on top of each other reach way up into the sky.
Just like the Tower of Babel.
Yes. I don't think that's accidental. How did Babylon get its name? From the Tower of Babel. So see, here again is overreaching. She sets herself up as more important, more real, more everything than the city of God. By the way, when Augustine wrote his famous work, The City of God, he had some of this in mind here. And if I remember rightly, he alludes to Babylon in that book. It's been a long time since I read it, so I'm not sure. Okay. She will be paid back in the same way she has done to others. Now here we're getting to the point of where this great secular city not only was an allurement to the believers of God, but they killed the believers. And of course that's directly aimed at Rome and her wannabe likes in subsequent history. In fact, we're going through a period right now where we have martyrs being killed. And this would be that. I wish I could tell some young people about this and get them to understand how wicked that is. Only she will receive twice as much as she gave. Now, this is not, she's just going to be punished like she punished other people. But God is more thorough. There's not going to be anything left. That's the idea of twice as much. Mix a cup for her, a double portion of her own cup. In other words, you take the cup of the wine of her sins, but now this word mix, whether you knew it or not, but wine most often in the New Testament was mixed with water and sometimes other spices. And so you mix her a cup that's just like what she forced other people to drink, only it's going to be twice as much. Give her as much pain and sadness as she gave herself luxury and glory. Can you see the poetic balance of these ideas? I hope you can, because I tried to preserve as many of them as I could. She has told herself, I am a queen, and I will never be a widow, nor will I ever mourn. The worst thing that a sophisticated female in that time, in that culture, would be a widow. You find that if a woman's husband in the upper classes, and this is based on the upper classes of Rome, the picture is, they didn't stay unmarried very long. They would find another husband. And so she said, I will never be a widow. Widows were to be looked down on. They didn't have any power. They just were the dregs of society almost. So I'll never be that. I'll never have to mourn the loss of a man. Because of these things, one day plagues of death, mourning, and famine will come to her. Now those were the things that happened to a city under siege before it fell. Death, mourning, famine. Some of the descriptions of what would happen at the fall of Jerusalem in the Old Testament are horrible, and they became cannibals because of the famine. All of this would be in the minds of the people to whom this was written. She will be consumed by fire, because mighty is the Lord God who condemns her. Now, see, that's the key here. Human people very seldom destroyed a city totally. although Rome came close to doing that in Jerusalem. And yet, there were people who lived in Jerusalem after it was destroyed by Rome in 70 AD. It was a hard life, a hard scrabble life, but they did do that. Okay. Any questions, any response? When I see your eyes glazing over, I will start asking you questions. Anybody?
Charles, jumping back to verse 3, when it talks about the merchants have become rich by selling their luxuries,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that could be kind of an allusion or drawing us to the idea of materialism? Of
Yes,
how
and-
the world is so consumed with things and materials?
Yes, that's exactly right. See, there were the merchant class, whatever you want to call them, of the ancient Roman world, depended on bringing things all the way from Mongolia along the caravan routes. And we're going to have a scene where you can have these merchants coming in onto the plain and looking at Babylon burning at a distance and bemoan and lament because their prophet has fled. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to get a response from you.
Selfish people.
So, yeah.
Oh,
Okay. So far, what are you thinking and feeling about what we've read together? See, you've got some kind of thoughts and some kinds of feelings, and I want to know. Steve?
Oh, gee. You know, I'm trying to assimilate all of it in terms of putting it together with what we've gone over already.
Mhm.
And, you know, and also trying to think forward to the future, but realizing that this is symbolical of a worldview.
Yes. That's exactly the point I want you to get. This is not just a specific city, although Rome was the pattern.
Well, and I was just thinking of it this way too, you know, in Daniel and, you know, Nebuchadnezzar had the dream of, you know, basically what was the world powers
Mhm.
all the way from himself to Rome.
Mhm.
And, you know, in a sense, it's that statue of that world order
Mhm.
at its, you know, at its, towards its end, but
Yeah.
that's that world order
Yeah,
thing.
that's the stone that fell, it rolled down and broke the, the legs of clay.
This, the stone is what's happening.
Yes, that's putting it into context of the Old Testament. Not you?
When we read this, she has told herself, I'm a queen and I will never be a widow, nor will I ever mourn. What comes to mind right there is, to my mind, is like, you know how right now everybody's is like looking for power, politics, and the worldly things. Like it's never enough. We always want more and more and more,
And
because we have this mindset that this will never end, or
yes, very good. That's exactly the point. Evil never recognizes itself as evil, or hardly ever. And there's never any idea about what's going to happen tomorrow. Whatever it is I've got now, I'm going to always have it. Anybody else? I just started that way. Ray?
That thing that you're writing about, you know, twice mixing up, double portion of her own cup and things like that, kind of reminds me of Macbeth, where the three witches are saying double,
Double, double, toil and trouble. I am Newton Torfrog.
But
I memorized that one.
it's just, you know, the poetic thing of how intense this is going to be. I don't think we realize how intense this punishment or this situation is going to be, because we've never seen it, at least not here in the U.S. I mean, there's been floods, yes, there's been, you know, the hurricanes, but the massive destruction of a large area.
To what? If you want to get a feeling, a poetic feeling, and stay in the continental United States, go to Mesa Verde.
Yep, been there.
Yes, and you can, those big, ornate buildings, empty. They're the haunt of demons and birds and everything.
I get a sense of defiance, even though she's gone through so much destruction and everything, and she still kind of want to hold on to her last leg and not wanting to give up worldly
Yes.
and demonically.
Yeah.
You know,
See, I alluded to Augustine's City of God treatise, and that was in response to the burning of Rome by barbarians, and people blamed Christians for that. And you know what? In a sense, they were right. Had you ever thought about that? Gibbon's decline and fall of the Roman Empire, he attributed it to Christians. And the Christians would say, that's right. Our God did that. And the reason I brought out the City of God, because it was in response to that. Anybody else?
This come out from her, my people,
Mm-hmm.
says it's a warning to us.
Yes. See, God,
We in America are all rich,
yeah. Yes,
and we're constantly accumulating.
yes. And it's not bad to be rich, but it's bad to depend on riches.
I think that maybe to get just a small smidgen of a glimpse, we can reflect back on what it was like in 2008 when this financial collapse took place. You know, how people were just, you know, and that's probably just a miniature of what this is going to be like.
Yes. See, the ultimate is that when God causes the whole way of life to be destroyed at the end of time, there's not going to be anything left. The lament will be, you know, mountains fall on us, caves cover us up.
What comes to my mind is Katrina.
Well, I can understand that. That's probably as immediate thing, but if we'd have been up on the East Coast, Sandy would do pretty good. Hurricanes are next to tornadoes.
Tsunami.
What?
The Japanese tsunami.
Oh, that's the one that comes to my mind, because I watched, I don't know who took the pictures of that, but it was kind of stately. It just, and then, yeah, just slow, yeah.
Slow and steady.
And inevitable. I think about the tidal bore in the Bay of Fundy up in the Newfoundland. Been there, and it's 4 or 5 miles of beach in that estuary. And when the tide starts coming in, if you were there on the edge of it on a horse, You couldn't outrun it as it comes in. There's even a reversing waterfall not far from York. The water goes down this way when the tide is out, and it goes up the waterfall when the tide is in. And it's that kind of inevitability. Okay, you're all livened up and back involved in it. That's good. The kings of the earth who have sexual sins with her and shared in her luxury will weep and lament over her. Now, have you ever seen any television of people in the Near East lamenting? I'm sure a lot of you have. They do that. They do it with their tongues, Mike.
I was trying to imitate it with my finger.
Yeah, it is a L-U-L-U-L-U sound because that is one of the standard endings in Arabic, and they use that sound, and they throw things in the air, and you think a lot of people think they're excessive, but in a way it's cathartic, but it won't be cathartic for these people because there's nothing left. He said, they will be afraid of her destruction, so they will stand a long way from her and say, what terrible things happened to her. Now, I have tried 2 or 3 different ways to translate the idea of woe. That's what people say, woe. We don't even have that in our vocabulary. And the idea is God will cause bad things to happen. The subject of woe is God causes it. So I tried to get the emotional equivalent of that idea. What terrible things happened to her, the great and powerful city. Your destruction has come upon you in a single hour. Now, this is emphasizing that God's not going to take a long time. Yes, God's not going to take a long time. We're going to see that the Battle of Armageddon was over before it started. And I can point that out to you. These people that visualize, a long, grinding battle between good and evil don't recognize the power of God Almighty. When He says you're finished, guess what? You're finished. That's all He has to say. Before He gets through saying it, you are. Then the merchants of the earth will weep. Now see what John is doing here is going to the different classes of people who depended upon this great luxurious city for their livelihood. Wonder how many people today make their living on furnishing the luxury and I always think about celebrities but you know what? You have to watch out about celebrities because they're celebrity preachers. And I think they are included in this. They will be sad because now there will be no one to buy what they sell. This is true because they sell gold, silver, pearls, fine linen, silk and purple cloth, things made of expensive wood, ivory, brass, marble, cinnamon and other spices, myrrh, frankincense, incense, wine, olive oil, fine wheat flour, grain, cattle, sheep, horses and carriages, and human beings. Now,
Slave trade.
What? Yes.
Slave trade.
So, yes. Okay. Now, notice, these are, it doesn't mention barley flour, which is the common fare of ordinary people. These are all luxury goods. Now, in fact, I could have said luxury goods, but you know what's the value of listing things like this? That is an emotional appeal. One of the ways in which poets write poetry is to make lists of things like that.
Well, I've got gold, silver, linen,
Uh-huh.
and cinnamon, wine, olive oil, fine flour.
Uh-huh.
Counting your luxuries?
What?
Yeah. So we're on this.
Yeah, you see why people consider all Americans wealthy. Even the poorest of us actually have more income. But I'm not saying that's just or unjust or what, I'm just saying that's true. Okay. The things you desired so much have departed from you. All your riches and shining splendor have disappeared from you. They will never come back to you. Now, notice I indented that because it has the same cadence and rhythm that the other parts had. I racked my brains trying to figure out who is saying this.
Asking myself the same thing. I thought we were talking about worldwide destruction.
Yeah. Now my best guess, and it is a guess, is that this is John's comment on what he has just written. Now I don't know. It could be an angelic comment, but John is so careful to attribute quotations to people and things that I don't know, but that's exactly just what it says. The merchants who became rich by selling these things to her will stand far away from her because they're afraid of her suffering. They will lament and saying, what terrible things happened to her. Now notice how he repeats. I told you it was a lot like fairy tales are. It has a mythic element to the literary structure. What terrible things happened to her, the great city. She was dressed in fine linen and purple and scarlet cloth. She glittered with gold, jewels, and pearls. All this wealth was destroyed in a single hour. It's almost like John repeats himself to make the impact stronger. And it works, doesn't it? See, that's what fairy tales, legends do. They repeat because nobody can miss the lesson. And another thing, they repeat because the things were meant to be memorized and said out loud. And it's easier to remember repetition. Then the captains of ships, sailors, and those who made their living on the sea will also stand far away from her while they watch, that shouldn't be ED, watch the smoke from her burning. Now, this is the scene I want you to think about. This would be like a city on a plain. Now, Rome is built on 7 hills, but there's some coastal plains close to her. And I don't know whether I've been to Rome, but I've never driven out the Appian Way or any other direction and looked back and see what you could see about Rome. But here is a picture. Think of the merchants or the sea captains. Rome was not itself a port city. Puteoli was about 6 or 8 miles outside the walls of Rome to the west. And on the sea, you could see this city set on the hills in the distance. And these sea captains, and in a lot of cases, the person who owned the ship was the captain of it. Not always, but majority of them are done that way. And here they are, they're sailing in, and there's the city in the distance burning. A big column of black smoke. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Can you see that in your mind's eye? And those who make their living on the sea will also stand far away from her while they watch the smoke from her burning. They kept crying out, "Was there ever a city like her?" They threw dust on their heads and lamented. And again, here's that lamenting, the throwing dust up in the air and letting it fall on your head. It's the sign of great mourning. What terrible things happened to her, the great city. In her, all those who owned ships became rich from her wealth. All those riches were destroyed in a single hour. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Now, this is the rejoicing of the people of God. Their enemy has been triumphant for so very long. Their enemies have been wealthy, and the controllers, the power brokers, the merchants, and people who are people of faith have to obey the voice from heaven that says, "Come out from among them." Don't participate in their sinfulness. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds there. Because remember Jesus' parable about the kingdom when he said it's like where there's wheat and tares planted together? And somebody wanted to rush in and say, "Okay, just pull the tares out." He said, "You can't do that because you would destroy the good wheat." And so we live in a world where we can be aware that things are bad and wicked and try our best not to participate in them, but it will come leaking into our families. It'll come too close to who and what we are, and we can find ourselves being influenced by influences that we don't even realize until we've been influenced by them. I find that in my own life. And so remember, that's a constant battle. It's not something you can win the victory over and say, "Well, I've got it done." Only what?
When it gets done.
Only, yes, only when we're through with this life. He says, "Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints and apostles." I think that the word apostle here means missionaries, because the word apostle sometimes means that. It's simply one sent. sent on a mission. And prophets. Now, if you will notice, I have stayed away from the word prophet, prophesy, prophecy in my translation. You have any idea why I do that?
People think it's just telling the future.
Yes, that's exactly right, Cindy.
And a lot of times it's just teaching.
Yes, I use something like people who bring a message from God, because that's basically what the root word means. It can be a message about the future, it can be a message about the past, it can be a message about the present. It's the message from God. Profano means to speak for another person. And so I just don't, words that, like slavery, I avoid that where I can, because immediately we think about our slavery based on racial differences. It was not that at all in Roman times, and it's so much different that to use the word slave just really distorts. Just like Jesus avoided calling himself the Messiah because he knew the Jews would misunderstand that. So he chose another designation.
Something comes to mind in my head that when you say rejoicing, I'm thinking of the saints under the throne
Mm-hmm.
rejoicing, or is this an angelic rejoicing, or?
That's a good question. I think it includes all those who belong to heaven.
So they're all happy, rejoicing.
Because, see, this,
Babylon is getting what it deserves now.
yes, think about that. See, they ask how long? And God said, you wait a little while. And he gave them white garments and things. So this is the fulfillment of what they were asking for. This is what's going to happen. And so the word rejoice can be translated be happy.
I think it gives the sense of vindication.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like say for instance, you're in a trial and you're accused of all this bad stuff and things like that, and the people who are against you have all the power, and you're kind of like waiting for the end and the vindication that's going to come from the declaration of the judge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
I kind of look at it as like a victory rejoicing. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
This is the end, and it's not so much they're getting what they deserve, but I'm about to get
What I do
God
deserve.
will, what we don't deserve. But
Okay, I like
God
that.
has to give us.
Okay. Yes. The next idea there is because God has judged, or God has, and remember, judging is sometimes means condemn, and sometimes it means judge and reward. So you have to know what's going on. And I think here, as you said, Mike, it is that the blood of his saints, his missionaries, his preachers and teachers have been shed for however long the time will last. And now, all of that is brought judgment upon the people who did that. And so it is time to rejoice with the joy of the Messiah.
So Charles, just to be clear, we're talking about the final judgment.
Yes, that's right.
And it will be us rejoicing.
Yes, that's right. See, and we're going to find that again and again from the. Now, you realize that we covered a whole chapter tonight.
Not quite.
Not quite, but close.
Just
So,
keeping you straight.
so,
She's holding your feet to the fire.
oh yeah, I know that. They burn, the souls burn. So, somebody wanted to know about how many. I would say about 5 more lessons. There may be 6.